Okay, great. So welcome everybody to this first of a series of 4 webinars that we're running over the autumn and winter this year in BAPT. They're all about the applications of type. And I'm delighted that David Hodgson has agreed to do our first one. I'll say a little bit more about David in a minute, but if we could just go on to the next slide, David, please. I just want to mention that there are lots of other interesting people coming up. So we've got Susan Nash in November talking about dating, mating and relating. And if you follow social media, you know people spend a lot of time talking on social media about type and so on, and preferences, and should I, have a relationship with such and such a type and whatever. We've got Angelina Bennett talking about type and ego development. And then we've got a very useful and session for type practitioners on how to use type ethically next February. So series of 4 webinars in total, open to members of BAPT, APT and OSAPT. If you know anyone who you think might benefit, please just ask them to sign up. So you can sign up for all of them for the £45 annual BAPT membership. Great. Okay, so David Hodgson, I know, is known to many of us. He's been working for many years with schools, careers advisors, teachers, parents, students, and so on. One of the first books I ever bought on type was David's Buzz book. And I've also got his Personality in the Classroom. So both great books full of really practical information and resources. So I'm really pleased that David agreed to do this session for us. And I'm sure, as you know, this term, parents and pupils have probably been quite anxious, I imagine, going back to school and to colleges and so on in this really difficult situation after such a disrupted year. So I'm looking forward to hearing how type can help people, how we can help smooth the way for the parents and the pupils. So over to you, David.
Thank you, Catherine. And I do know most people, so I'll not give a big, long introduction, and I'll do some introductions regarding the work I've been doing as we go through. I'll mention it as it comes up. And the idea of this session is it would be nice if it's quite interactive. If you do have any comments or thoughts, please do share them. That would be fantastic. I am aiming to finish at 7:15 thereabouts, so that there's then a little bit of time for people to add in more comments and thoughts. And as we go through, you will be asked to introduce yourself in a couple of minutes. And if you perhaps give a very quick introduction to why you're here. Are you here as a parent or as someone who's going to advise parents, or you working with in schools and so on yourself? That would be useful to know, and then I can give relevant examples as we go through. So I think we'll get straight on, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with my conclusion. So quite often I don't get time to give my big finish good point at the end. So I'm going to do that right at the beginning. And this is based on when I first started to work with young people, teenagers, I asked them, what do you want in life? I thought that was a good place to start. And the answers they gave seemed to be pretty consistent. They said they wanted to be happy, successful, and feel like they made the most of whatever talent they had. And then and I am happy with that, and I'm happy for them to then define what happy, success and talent means and work with them to make the most of it. And incidentally, when I ask adults the same question, what do you want in life? They say the same things, but they usually add in health. That's the one difference, which is possibly understandable. So, and I thought I'd start off with an example of the proudest parents in the world at the moment must be Emma Raducanu's parents, and she, the way she thanked them about how tough they were, but how brilliant they were and how they supported her was fantastic. And we can only, I don't know about you, we can only dream that one day our children will thank us so publicly for how brilliant we were as parents. I'm still waiting. I don't know if any of you have had that accolade yet. So we're going to have a look at, so that's the theme of tonight, what this whole parenting thing that that most of us, I would guess, are involved in. And the assumptions I want to make before we start are quite simple ones. One, parents need help. Two, children need help. And the way that I think we can help them is by recognizing that we need some kind of model and a language and a structure to be able to frame the discussions we have. And I've always found personality type just about the best way to do that. It's such a fantastic model to be able to help people talk about themselves and relationships. I've not really discovered anything that touches it. So that's why I've always used this model to help with relationships between parents and children. And it may not be perfect, and there may be other models out there, but I've certainly found that this is good enough and has helped me. So that's the model we're going to look at this evening. I want to, as well as your introduction, I'm going to invite you and really plead that you do answer this question. Don't bat it away. If you are a parent, then if you were told you had to choose the preference of your child before they were born, so you have to. You can't just say, "Oh no, I'll be happy with whatever comes, whatever they are." Every type's equally fantastic. You can't give that answer. It's got to be, if you had to, then what preferences would you choose for your child? So that's just hopefully to get you thinking about the themes that we're going to cover as we go through. So a quick introduction of who you are, why you're here, perhaps, and also an answer to this question. It's respond to John Luke. I found that as well, that at the end of any course I delivered with teachers about teaching, they'd come up and ask about their own children. And usually I'm going to just give points as we go through, because we don't have loads of time. But usually the parents that had trouble with their children, the children were ESTP or ENTP. So that's what I've found. And they would also ask about their partner. So I found the book Just Your Type, that was a fantastic to have, and I could show people that they'd work out their partner's type, read the book, the entry for their type match, and usually their jaws would drop and they'd be astounded at how accurate it was. So that's got me really interested into type as well. And what I found was, when I work with young people, once they knew the model reasonably well, or even briefly, I could give them a puzzle and say, this is a family, and I wouldn't tell them, but it would be the Simpsons. So I would say there's an ESFP dad, an ISFJ mum. If you don't know the Simpsons, I apologize. An ESTP son and probably an INFJ daughter. Go and work out the relationships they have. Who gets on with who? What are the sources of conflict in the relationship? And they would spot it really well. It was quite phenomenal, actually, how accurate they were able to pick out what we see in most episodes of The Simpsons. And so that really got me hooked on wanting to keep going with exploring this as an area to help children with their parents initially, but then parents with their children too. My children, they're the opposites. ISFJ, ENTP, which is fantastic as a trainer to have type anecdotes to cover all preferences is fantastic. So I thank them for that. And the reason I asked the question at the beginning was, people often, they won't answer the question about children, but the question comes, I'm often asked, who would be my best partner? I've been divorced and I'm looking for a new partner. What should I go for? And and the answer is, you can't give an answer either. We can only say, well, if we look at the the good and the bad, the potential conflict for each match that there may be. So, and I think that's where we get more success with this, just then looking at what's the difference, where's the relationship potentially strong, where are your weak points. And I think some of the comments made about we might not have chosen children who are very different to us, but actually when we have them and they're very different, we learn more, we grow more. So I would say on paper, my ENTP son is very similar to me, but actually I think I've learned more from observing and having a relationship with my ISFJ daughter. And so I think that seems to be true in work as well, doesn't it? When we work in organisations, that sometimes people initially get on well with someone who's similar, got a lot of similarities, and especially N or S and preferences, but then actually we get more probably from working with people who are more different. Okay, just a little bit about some of the work I've done in the past few years, which informs some of the things we're going to talk about. And also, we may not get a chance to, but if anyone was interested, I'm happy to talk afterwards via email. Do get in touch. So I've worked with young carers and their parents, and that's young people in a special kind of role of responsibility where they're almost the parents sometimes, and that's fascinating to observe the kind of dynamics that go on there. And I would say that if you're ever asked to do something along those lines, the type model goes down incredibly well for the parents and the carers to understand each other better. Brain tumor survivors and their parents, and again, any young person or parent that's going through difficult times, the model is especially helpful to them. That's what I've found. And then Sure Start Young Mums and Dads, that worked with those, and that's been brilliant. And I do remember working with Sure Start Young Mums. This was teenage mums, and the session I was delivering wasn't going down very well until I started to talk about what kind of a mum they're likely to be, what type of mum do they want to be, and that was when they engaged. I think that's another example of how it's such a useful place to go with personality type. I also work with teachers across the world and with parents across the world, and sometimes use the example of, one of the things I find really encouraging is that wherever I've been in the world, and we've got people from all over the world here today, is that the type model works. It works wherever you are in the world, sometimes in surprising ways. So when I was in the Middle East, and at the end of the session, one gentleman came up and said he thought this would be particularly useful for his relationship with his spouse, because he had 3 wives and 2 of them were getting on well with each other, but the third one wasn't with the other 2. So he was going to use the model to try and work out how to improve things there. So I'd never guessed that would be an application of this, but I think, beneath cultural differences, people are the same. We are the same as in that we're different types, and we have different strengths and different ways of looking at the world. And also work with young people. Most of my work is work with young people in large groups, the whole school year group usually, and sometimes going into special schools. I know someone mentioned that was their work. And again, what I try to do when I work in special schools is to come back to the key themes and ideas about what makes people different and how we can understand them better and adapt our own behaviour. And whenever young people do that, they say that they find the model useful. Okay, I would just like to share. I'm going to use different slides, and sometimes I'll use my own model to help me introduce this to young people. I found that they would forget the letters quite quickly if I saw them again, and then there was a couple of weeks gap. So I put animals to each of the the four-letter preference, and they're in the Casey groups. So the bears are all the SJs, as you can see. The cats, they're all the SPs. Sea animals NF, and the birds NT. So that was, and I found they would remember the animal and it would engage them. They really would engage with, and then my descriptions, you can see some of my work free on websites, icould.com. There's which is used by a lot of young people every year. Over 250,000 people find out their type using that site, and they like the animals. I find it's a good way to engage, so we could say the qualities of koalas, or the qualities of a clownfish, and link it to the personality strengths. So I would suggest, if you are interested in work with young people, to have a look at that as a way to introduce them to their type. So it's a really nice way in, and it also doesn't make them feel like they're being psychologically, someone's gone inside their head and had a good rummage round. It gives the impression of being light, fluffy, and fun. But the danger is it can look superficial. But we know that behind the theory and the work that's gone on behind all of this, so we know that I like the risk of it looking a bit superficial, to be able to get them interested, and then start to go into more depth and detail. I wanted to share some of the work I've done over the past 20 or so years, and this was when I go in and work with large groups of young people, year groups. It gives me a fantastic opportunity, once they've discovered their animal, their preferences, to be able to put them into groups. So can all the ISFJs go into one corner, and each group go into corners, and there'll be enough represented usually for there to be groups. And one activity I gave the groups of young people were, can you tell me, how should adults treat you to get the best out of you? And this would be, how should your parents treat you? How should your teachers treat you to get the best out of you? And then I put this together on the answers that came back were pretty consistent. So if you have a look at your own animal, or your own preference here, and if you've forgotten your letters, this chart is in the same position as you normally see types presented. So ISTJ top left, ENTJ bottom right, and so on. So this would be the advice to the parents. How can you, or teachers, how should you treat these different children to get the best out of them? So one question would be just to for you to have a look at yours and see whether that sounds reasonable to you. Is that how people should treat you to get the best out of you? So for example, we've got a few ENFPs that the advice would be, if you've got a child that's an ENFP clownfish, that the best way to reach them is to be curious, listen as they describe their ideas, appeal to their unique imagination, offer them choices. That was the feedback I had from the ENFPs. So I don't know if anyone has any thoughts or comments on that, that this is one way we can start to engage the adults. If not, I'm happy to move on. But do chip in if you would like to. And one of the reasons I wanted to do this, show this slide, was because I would quite often, and still do, go into a lot of schools when I deliver inset and hear the comment that personality type isn't relevant in schools, isn't relevant in classes, because all children learn in the same way. And it's about the teaching, and it's about making the teaching strong. And what they usually mean by that is being strict and concentrating on the teaching outcomes and the lesson plan, and teaching to a lesson plan, which I think is ridiculous personally. And so I wanted to try and gently nudge teachers and parents, because I would sometimes work with parents. Parents would say, well, a common comment was, well, I don't know what's gone wrong because I've got two children and one of them's turned out really well and the other one is a pain in the bum. And then we would look at the preferences and start to look for explanations. And it's when we delved into that, it was often, the parent would say, well, I've treated both my children the same, and then they expect the same result. Well, that's, if the children are different, the way we should treat them should probably be different too. So I find this is a useful way to start to have what is in effect quite a difficult conversation with a parent. Because if you didn't have the type model, I don't know about the rest of you, I find that when you use type as a model, you can almost be quite rude to people. You can get right to the core of important issues in their life, and they don't think you're being rude or critical. You just explore their strengths and areas where they might need to rethink their approach. Okay. Right. Like I say, if anyone wants to chip in, please do. We'll do a breakout group shortly, just to give you a chance to talk. I wanted to share with you something. One of my ambitions was to be able to say to a teacher, whatever type preferences you have. So this example here is ENFP teacher with ENFP student. And in my book, The Personality in the Classroom, there are 256 combinations. So I've written out these for each person so that to give the teacher or the parent some help. It's a bit like the Tiger book with just your type, but doing it with parenting and teaching. And the difference with this and the relationship is, I think this is where it's not an equal relationship. This is where one person is nominally, at least in charge, is the responsible adult. But I think that can have links to the work we do in organizations where someone's not getting on with their boss. And that's where there's an unequal relationship. So I don't think it's unique to parenting where that happens. But this would be some of the advice that I would give to an ENFP teacher if they had an ENFP student. So things like they have the potential to get along like a house on fire, but if they don't tune into each other's values and belief system, then they can end up wanting to destroy each other in class. And this is based on when I've talked to teachers and young people about which teachers have talking to young people, which teachers do you get on with, when do you have trouble with teachers, and equally with asking teachers the same. So one nice example was an ENFP child who said she had an ENFP teacher, and she was told off regularly for low-level disruption for chatting to her friends, and she sat near the back of the class. So the ENF teacher moved her to the front of the class, and she still chatted. So then the teacher moved her chair to sit next to the teacher, but she found that she still ended up just engaging with she couldn't stop this student contributing with interesting or wacky ideas that would interrupt the class. And I thought that's one of the potential dangers. And I sometimes see this on training courses. I might suffer from it as an ENFP presenter. If there's another ENFP in the room, I can end up just talking to them and forgetting a lot of the other people in the room. So the lively banter, it could become nauseous to the other people in the room. Yeah, and that's something to. And one of the bits of advice to the ENFP would be to develop with that student is to both of you to develop your IST. I just call it ISTJ skills as a shorthand for look at all the things that you don't do naturally and try and develop those. Okay. Right, what we're going to do is Catherine's going to put us into random breakout groups, and we'll just give you we'll give you 5 minutes, so we'll see how we get on. And what I'd like you to do is just quickly go into any anecdotes or answers you have to any of these questions. You can choose the easy one, I think, is which type, if any, are more likely to drop out of college. But you could also have a go. Which types, if any, do you think are more likely to struggle at school? And then another question, why do girls outperform boys in school almost in every age category? And they certainly do in the UK. So I don't know if anyone knows whether that's the case in other countries, whether that research has been replicated. So we'll let you have 5 minutes, and then you can come back with any points that you would like to share with the group.
Okay, brilliant. So you should have something on your screen now asking you to join one of the 2 breakout groups, either room 1 or room 2. So sometimes, depending on what device you're on, it can appear near the bottom. You might have to hover somewhere. If you have trouble, flag that up to me. Obviously, David, you're not joining a group, and nor am I. I think everybody's gone. Right, I believe everyone has gone to the breakout groups. I can't actually see people, David.
That we can use. Yeah, so I want to briefly share with you 2 lenses, and these are the things that have the biggest impact as far as I can see. But not only that, these are the ways that I've been able to help parents and children understand type best. So that's why I wanted to share the 2 lenses that I'm going to share with you. The first one is the AI preference, and it's quite simple, extroversion, introversion preference, but I see this almost in every classroom. Almost in every classroom I go into, there's maybe two young people that are disruptive and that are taking up most of the oxygen in the room. They're demanding the attention from the teacher, and it can be sort of very corrosive, and it can destroy things very quickly. So that's something I notice as someone that's in classrooms a lot. And I think if we were to say if that was recorded and the parents could see the way their e-preference child might be behaving, they'd be appalled, and they'd want to do something about it. They'd have a chat. So a couple of points about the AI preference. One interesting idea was that basically most education systems favour I preference rather than A preference, especially in secondary school. Possibly not in primary, but certainly in secondary. And I was working with there were some teachers from Italy that said they thought that's what they noticed about visiting Britain, that our system was just forever wanting children to shut up, be quiet, listen, and get on with their work. Some schools even ban talk in the corridors, so children would be ready to start the next lesson, which I think is almost like an infringement of a human right for an E-preference person to be told you just cannot talk in the corridors. It's just mind-blowing. But there is that does persist, that kind of belief. My little grandson, he's 4 years old, he's just started school, bless him. I'm sure he's a little E-preference, and his first prize was for sitting still and quiet. And I just thought that just shows what is it school wants from the children. Sit down, shut up, and listen, and you'll get a little sticker for it. Bless the poor little lad. Okay, so in Italy, the teacher said, our system's different. We encourage chat, where there is more chat in class between us. Even the exam system, There are more oral exams, because an exam, a traditional exam, is sit down and write down what you know about a topic for an hour or so. That is bound to favour I preferences. That's, you know, I'm having to oversimplify here because of time, but I hope these are some of the headline things that I've discovered. And also, when I've worked with teachers from Nigeria, the culture there is very much a preference. It's always great to have, you know, you don't have to ask for volunteers. There's no, you know, there's no awkward pause when you ask a group of Nigerian school teachers for a volunteer. They almost push each other out the way to want to be, you know, up there and singing along, you know. So that's been my experience. There are some cultures where it might be a preference. One head teacher actually from a Nigerian school came up at the end and said to me, I've got a problem with a teacher. And it's basically, she said to me, the problem is this teacher's an I preference. Should I sack them? Which I thought, wow, that's, you know, I'm sure you know what my answer was, that you should use this I preference as a gift, because, you know, so many of the children and so on. I'll just have to promise that I give a good type answer to that question. But it's interesting that we can be asked that kind of question. Another thing I'd like to share is during lockdown, I did some research with young people, and guess what? I preferences, especially ISFJs and ISTJs, seem to quite like lockdown. They could get on and go and do their work at home without interruption, without having to perform and share their thoughts and ideas, and they quite like that. So that was I thought that was interesting. Because ISFJ and ISTJs, they make up about a quarter of children in the schools, don't they? So maybe it would be worth having a look at how to look after them as well. I do also, might not get a chance to later, so I do also like the idea of sharing with all children and teachers that as type practitioners, we're not saying that we should only be working to the child's strengths and natural preferences. We're duty bound to try and help them develop the other as well. So I do stress that as well in training, and I know that point came up in the breakout group that I was in. I want to share with you a couple of one of the activities I often do to explore EI difference with parents and with children, is get them to spot the difference. And you know, for the SJs in the group, if I were to say to you, I want you to find 10 differences, I would bet that Sarah and some of the other, I know Sarah, ESFJ, you would almost feel duty bound to find 10 before you started listening to anything else that was said. I don't know if that's true, but that would be my guess. That's usually what happens. So I set them off on a spot the difference, and what usually happens is the I preferences are better at this at the beginning because they can concentrate, listen to instructions and concentrate and get on with it. But then the A preferences, one, they don't usually listen to instructions first time, so they've not heard. Then they want to look over to see what everybody else is doing. But then they start to catch up. Once they settle down, they will start to catch up. And what I usually do is stop the activity after about a minute and a half when I know that I preferences are probably ahead. And we do an average of how many differences are spotted by E preferences and I preferences, and the I preferences win. And that's the prediction, and it always seems to happen. So it's really good when I can show children that this is real, this has a real, this is likely to have a real impact on your approach to work, the way you perform in classroom. And then I also give another activity that allows the A preferences to shine. And it's usually a scavenger hunt kind of activity where they have to go around and talk to 10 different people that have someone that's been on holiday to Scotland, someone that's got a red top at home, someone, and so on and so on. Someone's got a pet hamster. And the A preferences tend to win on that one. And the ISFJs often just don't join in, and I'll go up and say, why didn't you join in that? Well, I thought you wouldn't watch, you weren't looking at me. I could have got away with this. If I just kept quiet, you wouldn't have noticed. Which again, I mean, how interesting is that as the basis of a teacher having a better understanding of how different children prefer to operate, but we need chances for them both to shine in a safe way. So that kind of activity, and I know we use this a lot in type training. Generally, we use activities because they're fantastic when we can sort of predict, just to prove that, you know, that there's some that this is real. Okay, right. Let's see. I'm looking at the time. What I'm working on at the moment is specific advice for each parent to how they can reach to support their child in their education. So the idea is here that there are 254 combinations, and I've started to write them. So if anybody would like to help me with this, I don't mean write it, I just mean give me feedback. If you tell me, if you say, right, I'm the ISFJ, and I've got a child that's, you know, as you've told me tonight, some of your children, what advice would you send me if I was the parent asking you at the end of the session? I'll send you that advice, and then if you wanted to, I'd be, you know, find any feedback really useful. I can then, if you said that was spot on, David, great, or, you know, there was one or two things that you might want to look at here, then I'd be great to get any feedback. So we haven't got time for me to, you know, to put up all of the combinations, but if anyone that's interested, please do to get in touch afterwards, and you will help me create what will become a free resource for parents, so that they can type in their type, they put their child, and then it will automatically go through the magic of the internet to their description. So I want to make it as accurate and good as possible, because if it's going to be used, it's in all of our interest that it's good quality. And if it's not good enough, then I want to know, so I either change it or don't use it. Okay, so I think it's probably best to just skip on. Another way of looking at the AI preference is I've looked at the work of Jane Kesey and others when we look at functions, and that was mentioned earlier on in the session. And that often links quite nicely to E and I preference. So I've started to look at some of Jane's work because it's so interesting. I like the way she phrases it. Can we spot what a happy child looks like in school? And as parents, we want to know that, don't we? We want to know when our child looks like they're doing well. And then also, what are the clues that they might be struggling? And then also, the third bullet point there would be the advice for the teacher or for the parent when it comes to helping them with homework and helping them with revision. So again, I've got some of that. And if you wanted to give me feedback on that, it would be brilliant to share that, for you to share that with me. So I've got the two examples there, the extroverted sense and introverted sense. And okay, now we've got about 3 minutes or so. If everyone's okay, I'll quickly run through the other lens that I wanted to share with you that I find particularly useful. So I'll give you the headlines on this, and I'm happy to share slides with everyone. And I'm sure myself and Catherine can organise that to everyone that's attended. And so the second lens is temperament, and that's because I find SN preference particularly fascinating. Someone mentioned about the child right at the beginning, I think, that we think we'd like a child that's the same, that if we're an N preference, we'd like an N preference child, so we can go off on our flights of fancy together. I would certainly find that that's been fantastic with me and my son, who we're both N preferences. But as I said, I've learned so much more from trying to get inside the head of my daughter, who's ISFJ. And we do, well, I'm sure, you may be familiar with some of the games and activities of NS preference. The one that Jane Kesey uses is the snowman, where she said, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but it's certainly in my book, and if you and it's in hers as well, where we ask children to write something based on this title, and you don't give them any more instructions, and they go off, and the title is the snowman, and the S preferences do a very much factual, a snowman is this, it's used in stories, and or they'll do a how to build a snowman, an instruction manual if they're SJ often, whereas the N preferences write a fanciful story with a profound meaning, the NFs about love, and the NTs do some sarcastic story about, that's often what happens. So this SN preference, it's fantastic. It's really nice when teachers, you see teachers first say that, and it just dawns on them that a lot of what they've been doing will make more sense than it previously did. So here is the here is just a quick summary of the 4 temperaments. So this is the experience I've had with helping parents look at what's their parenting style, then also what's the child preference. So in the moments that we've got left, it might be quite nice for if anyone wanted to comment on, first of all, whether they concur with the descriptions there as a summary for parents to understand the relationship that they have with their child, then this can be quite a powerful tool, a powerful piece of information. Perhaps, well, okay. Well, I'll just quickly, I found that most will agree with that. There's the sea animals, the hippies, the NFs, yeah, where the nurturers, the conciliatory ones, trying to make friends and all be lovely, and we can look at where that may or may not work, and where that might cause problems, and we could do that with each of the 4 temperaments, and I find parents do like that and seem to get a lot from it, as do the children, and the children often get a lot from it because it just gets to the core of who they are. So I was doing some work with some young people that wanted to all be lawyers. They were all doing law degrees. When I asked what kind of a career do you envisage for yourself, it was hilarious. The NFs all wanted to be environmental, like saving the world as a lawyer, and then the STJs wanted to go and earn lots of money as lawyers. And it was just fascinating when they could see it through the temperament lens. It seemed to make sense to them. So, and it was an interesting discussion. Okay, right. I'm going to talk a little bit longer. If that's okay, nod. And if you'd rather stop for questions, don't nod.
Great, that's fine. That's great.
Yeah, we've got. I mean, David, we've got till 7:30. I think that's what people are expecting. Right. So you've certainly got time for a bit more.
Okay. Well, what I'll do is, should I share this one? This is how the brain develops from newborns, and as you can see, the neural in the brain, the synaptic connections go crazy for the first 6 months, up to 2 years. The brain's connecting, and that's why when you ask a 2-year-old a question that's simple, they sometimes just are they just have to let themselves wander down hundreds of different potential answers before they can give you an answer to why are you only wearing one sock. You know, it can take them ages to answer. And then after about a couple of years, we start to prune and start to work out what works for us. And they become the habits and the strategies that we have, the behavioral tics and so on, the way that we can function quickly in the world and make decisions. And I wonder, I was going to ask for any thoughts and comments on it, as to whether that's sort of how it's almost, maybe because I'm an end preference, I love analogies, and metaphors, but whether that seems a bit like what happens with any kind of way of how we solve any problems, either at work or as a parent or as a child. We need to go through the N bit, then the S bit, those steps. And I know there is the 4-step problem solving model, the zigzag model as well. So I wondered whether, when we talk about the SN difference, I usually try to bring it back together to say that although it's the preference that seems to be the more create the most confusion and difference between people, actually we all need to be able to do both. So right, that I was going to say, because I wanted to talk about some things that are true for all parents and all children, because it's not all, everything's different. So one of the things that I thought, one of the pieces of research I looked at that I thought was really interesting that I've asked children about, and they tend to agree with this, is to do with the level of reward we give to children, and what their response to that is. So you can see that on the, apologies, I've had to handwrite it. But on the left hand side, young children, whatever reward, whether a reward is large, small or medium, doesn't really matter. They'll be happy to take a reward. When we're teenagers, it spreads out so that if we, so that's why young children, give them a sticker at school and they couldn't be happier. They wouldn't have been happier with £1 million. Because they can't see the difference. But once we're teenagers, we do spot that difference. And teenagers actually feel insulted by small rewards, which is why, and so something when I work with teachers, some of them insist on continuing with small rewards, possibly into the teenage years, and that maybe is not a good idea. And then by the time we're adults, we seem to have it in the right kind, this will be where we're all at with, we're going to respond better to a large reward, and we've got the patience to wait for it. Whereas when we're younger, we don't. So I wanted to share something that I thought can be useful for everybody. I also find what can be really motivating is sharing course and career advice based on personality preferences. And I'll only just refer you to the slide, but I'm sure you're familiar with that's one place where personality type is very good. The research is in and is continued to look at the different proportions. So for me as an ENFP, to know that ENFPs may well, a good place to start looking to gain motivation to work harder at school would be to maybe start to look at jobs that would excite me, and the jobs on the left hand side certainly do. And I find that very motivating for young people, and to share that with parents. Right, I was going to then sort of finish with this book. I always like to recommend a book in training, and if you haven't got this one, then you're in for a treat. It's absolutely fantastic, and they look at how school has got a lot of things wrong, and it's not they don't talk about personality, but they do everything else. So for us as personality, to put that on top of this book, I think is really powerful and interesting. Well, I haven't got time to really talk about it, but they do talk about the 7 survival skills. That's one of many lovely things that you can find in this book. Okay, right. What I might do is, would anyone like to, the only other thing that I made a note of that I haven't said, so I'll say that and then invite comments, is that the whole approach of primary school, I think, tends to be N preference. Even though more teachers are F preference in primary, it's very much let's all use our imagination and encourage that kind of play. So the N preference children tend to get to be bigged up. But by the time we get to secondary school, it becomes very much a S preference. So I sometimes joke, at secondary school, you could be told as you walk in as an N preference, well, you can leave your imagination at the school gates, mate, because you won't be needing that for the next 5 or 6 years. You just need to get on with the work as given. And obviously a slight caricature, but it's almost true. I found that as an N preference, just feeling if I wasn't allowed to use my imagination, it just destroyed my interest in so many subjects. And I remember saying to my biology teacher, it's a bit boring just learning the 7 functions of the liver at GCSE. Can we not do something more interesting? And I meant more N. And she said, oh, wait till A level. And then when I got to A level, she then said, we're now going to learn 15 functions of the liver. I said, Miss, you cheated. And she said, no, wait till you get to university. And I'm not kidding. It was 22 functions of the liver then. So I almost gave up because they said, no, you'll have to wait till postgrad. And I thought, I'm not sure whether to believe you. So I think that dynamic of how the education system shifts and what impact that has. And that was going to be the breakout question. What impact has your S or N preference had on your experience of education or of work? So if anyone wants to comment on that or ask any more of a general question, I'm going to give some time for that.
Brilliant. Thank you, David. I'm just going to stop the recording.